Have you ever felt the silence of a crowded room? That moment when your heart breaks so loudly you think everyone can hear it. Natalie Reeves was sitting at table 4 of the most expensive restaurant in Chicago, staring at an empty chair. Her date didn't just stand her up. He texted her to say she wasn't worth the parking fee. She was about to grab her purse and run, humiliated. But then, the air in the room changed. The temperature dropped, and he sat down. Not a savior, not a prince, but the alpha king of the Sterling pack. And the first thing he said to her wasn't, "Hello." It was, his loss. But why was the king of the underworld watching a broke art student? The answer will terrify you. This is the story of the alpha's debt. The vibration of the phone against the white tablecloth felt like a drill into Natalie Reeves's sternum. She didn't want to look. It had been 45 minutes. The breadbasket was cold. The butter had formed a weird, congealed skin. Around her, the low hum of Chicago's elite dining at L'Oubli created a wall of sound that made her isolation feel even more acute. L'Oubli was the kind of place where the water cost more than Natalie's hourly wage at the gallery. She was wearing a dress she couldn't afford, having skipped her utility bill to buy it a slip of emerald silk that felt too thin, too exposing. She picked up the phone. It was Jason. Jason, 7:48 p.m. Look. Nat. I'm not coming. Saw you through the window. You look desperate. Honestly, I'm looking for something high-end, and you're just discount rack. Don't text me again. The air left Natalie's lungs. It wasn't just rejection. It was a surgical dismantling of her dignity. She felt the heat creeping up her neck, a rash of humiliation. She looked up, instinctively scanning the window, but all she saw was her own reflection against the dark, glass, pale skin. Wide, terrified hazel eyes, and that stupid, expensive dress. Mademoiselle. The waiter was hovering. He was young, French, and his eyes held a pity that was worse than Jason's cruelty. Would you like to order now, or are we still waiting? Natalie's voice cracked. She cleared it, gripping her clutch so hard her knuckles turned white. I think there's been a mistake. I'm going to go. Nonsense. The voice didn't come from the waiter. It came from the shadows near the coat check, deep, resonant, and carrying a timbre that seemed to vibrate in the floorboards. A man stepped into the light. The restaurant, previously a cacophony of clinking silver and laughter, seemed to mute itself. It wasn't just that he was tall, though he towered over the maitre d' at well over 6'4". It was the way he moved, fluid, predatory, like a panther navigating a jungle of porcelain and glass. He wore a charcoal 3-piece suit that fit him with the precision of armor. His hair was black, swept back, revealing a face of sharp angles and a jawline that could cut glass. But it was his eyes that froze Natalie in her seat. They were grey, not a soft, cloudy grey, but the colour of steel before it strikes. He didn't look at the waiter. He walked straight to Natalie's table, pulled out the chair Jason was supposed to occupy, and sat down. The silence at the table was heavy, thick with the scent of expensive cologne, rain, and something else, something woodsy and musky, like deep pine forests. He looked at the phone still clutched in Natalie's hand, the screen still glowing with Jason's brutal text. His loss, the stranger said. His voice was low, intimate, as if they were the only two people in the room. Natalie blinked, her fight-or-flight response haywire. "Excuse me, Jason," the man said, reading the name on the screen without leaning in. "He's a mid-level analyst at Goldman, drives a leased BMW, cheats on his taxes, and, As of 5 minutes ago, he has made the worst mistake of his life. "Who are you?" Natalie whispered. Looking around, the waiter had vanished. In fact, the tables nearest them had quietly emptied out. "Do you know Jason?" The man picked up the menu, scanning it with bored indifference. "I know everyone. Natalie. But tonight, I'm just the man ensuring you eat dinner. How do you know my name?" He lowered the menu. The intensity of his gaze made her toes curl. "I know that you work at the Holloway Gallery. I know you paint in oils because you think acrylics lack soul. I know you're 3 months behind on your student loans. And I know you haven't eaten a full meal in 2 days because you bought that dress." Natalie stood up, her chair scraping loudly against the floor. "I'm leaving. You're a stalker." "Sit down," he said. It wasn't a shout. It was barely a whisper, but the command slammed into her chest with physical force. Her knees buckled, and she sat back down before she even realized she had decided to. Her heart hammered against her ribs. What was that? It felt like gravity had just increased tenfold, centered entirely on his voice. He signaled the waiter with a single raised finger. The waiter appeared instantly, trembling slightly. "The Wagyu for the lady, rare, truffle risotto, and a bottle of the 98 Pinot Noir. Leave the bottle." "Yes, Mr. Sterling, immediately. Mr. Sterling." Sterling. Natalie's breath hitched. Kieran Sterling. The name was whispered in Chicago circles with a mixture of reverence and terror. He owned half the skyline, real estate, shipping, tech. He was a titan. But there were rumors, too. Darker ones. People who crossed him didn't just go bankrupt, they disappeared. "Why?" Natalie asked, her voice trembling. "Why are you doing this?" Kieran Sterling leaned forward, resting his elbows on the table. He looked at her not with lust, but with a terrifying, analytical hunger. "Because, Natalie," he said, and his eyes flashed with a momentary, unnatural amber light. "Nature abhors a vacuum. Your date left an empty seat. I'm simply filling it. Now, drink your wine. We have a lot to discuss before the moon gets high." The dinner was an exercise in surrealism. The food was the best Natalie had ever tasted, but she could barely swallow past the lump of anxiety in her throat. Kieran ate with efficient, brutal grace. He tore into the meat with a little too much enthusiasm, his movements sharp. "You're not eating," Kieran noted, swirling his wine. "I'm not hungry anymore," Natalie lied. "Look, Mr. Sterling. Kieran, I appreciate the charity, but I don't understand what's happening. Did my boss send you? Is this about the gallery?" Kieran laughed, a dry, humorless sound. "The gallery, no. Though I am thinking of buying it. The lighting is terrible." He paused, his gaze dropping to her neck, where her pulse was fluttering visibly. "Tell me about Jason. Why him? Why do you care? Humor me." Natalie looked down at her risotto. "He seemed safe, normal. He liked my art, or he said he did." "He liked that you were manageable," Kieran corrected brutally. "He sensed you were wounded, and he thought that made you easy. Men like Jason are scavengers. They pick at the bones of things they can't kill themselves." "And what are you?" Natalie shot back, a spark of anger cutting through her fear. "You hijack a stranger's dinner, order for her, and psychoanalyze her life. Are you the hunter?" Kieran stopped chewing. He stared at her, and for a second, Natalie thought he might reach across the table and snap her neck. Instead, a slow, dangerous smile spread across his face. It transformed him from a cold statue into something devastatingly handsome. Yes, he said softly. I am the hunter, but tonight I am not hunting you. Suddenly, there was a commotion at the front of the restaurant. I left my wallet. I just need to check the table. Natalie froze. It was Jason. Kieran didn't even turn around. He just took another sip of wine. Jason burst into the dining area, flushed and clearly tipsy. He spotted Natalie. Nat, you're still here. I thought you'd have... Then he saw Kieran. Jason stopped dead. The colour drained from his face so fast it looked like a magic trick. His mouth opened and closed like a fish. Mr. Sterling, Jason stammered. I didn't know. I mean, I was just... Kieran slowly turned his head. He didn't stand up. He didn't have to. The air pressure in the room seemed to drop again. Jason, Kieran said, you forgot your wallet. Yes, exactly, And you forgot something else. Kieran stood up then. He unfolded his frame, rising to his full height. He walked around the table, moving silently. He stopped inches from Jason. Jason was shrinking, literally cowering. You forgot your manners, Kieran whispered. He placed a hand on Jason's shoulder. It looked like a friendly gesture, but Natalie saw Jason wince, his knees buckling as Kieran applied pressure. You left a lady alone. You insulted her. And now, you interrupt my dinner. I'm sorry, Jason squeaked. I didn't know she was with you. If I knew she was a Sterling girl, I never would have... She isn't a Sterling girl, Kieran said, his voice dropping to a growl that vibrated in Natalie's chest from 10 feet away. She is Natalie, and you are leaving. Permanently. Kieran leaned in and whispered something in Jason's ear. Natalie couldn't hear it, but she saw the reaction. Jason's eyes rolled back in terror. He nodded frantically, pulled away from Kieran's grip, and ran. He didn't walk. He sprinted out of the restaurant, knocking over a chair in his haste. Natalie stared at Kieran as he adjusted his cuffs and sat back down. What did you say to him? She asked, breathless. Kieran picked up his fork. I gave him financial advice. Eat your steak. Natalie, it's getting cold. The ride home was silent. Kieran drove a black Aston Martin that purred like a large cat. He didn't ask for her address. He just drove straight to her apartment building in Wicker Park, a crumbling brick walk-up that looked pathetic compared to the sleek leather interior of his car. He walked her to the door. The streetlights were flickering. Thank you, Natalie said, clutching her purse. For whatever that was, you really didn't have to. I did, Kieran said. He was standing too close again. He inhaled deeply, his nostrils flaring. You smell like lavender and turpentine. It's soothing. Okay. Natalie stepped back, unnerved. Good night, Kieran. Lock your door. Natalie, check the windows. Why? Because the city is full of wolves, he said enigmatically. And not all of them are as civilized as I am. He waited until she was inside and had turned the deadbolt before she heard the engine roar to life and fade away. Natalie didn't sleep. She painted. She painted charcoal swirls of grey eyes and sharp teeth. She painted the feeling of being hunted. The next morning, the reality of her life crashed back in. The gallery was freezing because the heater was broken. Her boss, Mrs. Gable, was in a foul mood. Natalie spent the morning hanging a new exhibition of abstract modernism that looked like spilled coffee. Around 11 a.m., her phone buzzed. It was a news alert. Breaking body found in Chicago River. Natalie swiped it away. It was Chicago. Bodies were found all the time. But then a text came through from her friend, Sarah. Sarah OMG Nat. Didn't you have a date with Jason Pellington last night? Natalie, yeah. It was a disaster. Why, Sarah, turn on the TV? Now. Natalie grabbed the remote for the gallery's small waiting room TV. The news anchor looked grim. Police have identified the victim as 28-year-old investment banker Jason Pellington. His body was discovered early this morning by sanitation workers near the Navy Pier. Police are withholding details, but sources say the attack was vicious, resembling an animal mauling. The remote clattered to the floor. An animal mauling. Natalie's mind flashed back to the restaurant. Kieran's hand on Jason's shoulder. You are leaving, permanently. The bell above the gallery door chimed. Natalie whipped around. Standing in the doorway, blocking out the morning sun, was a man. But it wasn't Kieran. This man was wider, dirtier. He wore a leather jacket that looked slept in. He had a scar running through his left eyebrow, and his eyes were a sickly yellow. He sniffed the air, a grotesque mimicry of what Kieran had done the night before. So, the stranger grunted, stepping inside and locking the door behind him. This is the little mouse that smells like the king. Natalie backed up against the reception desk. We're closed. Get out. The man laughed. It sounded like gravel in a blender. Kieran Sterling thinks he can claim a mate without the pack's permission. He thinks he can kill a blood moon pledge like Jason and walk away. Jason was a pledge pack mate. None of the words made sense. I don't know what you're talking about, Natalie said, reaching for the landline. The man moved with blurring speed. 1 second he was at the door, the next he was across the room, his hand wrapped around Natalie's throat, pinning her to the wall. You don't know, the man sneered, his teeth looking sharper, longer than they should be. Then let me educate you. You're the bait. And I'm going to send a piece of you to Sterling in a box. Natalie clawed at his hand, her vision spotting. She couldn't breathe. The man's strength was impossible. It wasn't human. Just as the darkness began to close in, the gallery's front window exploded. Glass showered inward like diamond rain. A black blur launched through the shattered pane, tackling the man away from Natalie. They crashed into a display of sculptures. Natalie fell to the floor, gasping for air, coughing. She looked up. Kieran was there, but he wasn't wearing his suit. His shirt was shredded. And as he rose from the debris, a low, rumbling growl erupted from his chest that shook the floorboards. His eyes were glowing, literally, glowing a brilliant, electric violet. The intruder scrambled back, bleeding. Sterling, you broke the accord. You touched her, Kieran said. His voice was distorted, layered with a guttural animal sound. You touched what is mine. Kieran didn't punch him. He swiped, and Natalie watched in horror as Kieran's fingernails and claws extended 3 inches, turning his hand into a lethal weapon. Look away. Natalie. Kieran roared. She didn't. She couldn't. She watched as the Alpha King tore the threat apart, realizing with a terrifying clarity that the man who had bought her dinner wasn't a man at all. He was a monster. And apparently, she belonged to him. The world was a blur of motion and nausea. After the gallery window exploded, Kieran hadn't given Natalie time to process the carnage. He had scooped her up effortlessly, as if she were made of paper, and carried her out the back exit before the siren started wailing. Now. She was in the passenger seat of the Aston Martin again, speeding out of the city. The Chicago skyline was shrinking in the rearview mirror, replaced by the dense, winding roads of the North Shore. Natalie was shaking. Her hands were gripping her knees so hard her nails dug into her skin. You killed him, she whispered. It wasn't a question. Kieran's hands were tight on the steering wheel. His shirt was torn, revealing skin that was already knitting itself back together. The deep gash on his shoulder from the intruder's knife was now just a faint pink line. He was going to kill you. Natalie. You changed, she stammered, looking at his profile. Your eyes, your hands. What are you? Kieran sighed, a sound that was more exhaust than breath. He pulled the car off the main road onto a private drive blocked by massive iron gates. The gates swung open automatically as they approached. I'm what keeps the other things in the dark from eating you, he said. We're almost home. Home I want to go to my home. Take me back to Wicker Park. Your apartment is a crime scene, Kieran said flatly. And even if it wasn't, every rogue wolf in the tri-state area now knows your scent. You go back there. You're dead by sunset. The car wound up a long driveway, lined with ancient oaks. At the top of the hill stood the Sterling estate. It wasn't a house. It was a fortress disguised as a mansion. Stone walls, gargoyles, and security cameras that tracked the car with mechanical precision. Kieran parked and killed the engine. The silence was deafening. Natalie. He turned to her. The violet glow was gone from his eyes, replaced by that intense steel grey. I know you're scared. You have every right to be. But you need to trust me. Just for tonight. Trust the man who ripped someone's throat out. Yes. He opened her door. Natalie stepped out, her legs wobbling. Kieran didn't touch her, sensing her fear. But he walked close enough to catch her if she fell. Inside. The house was a masterpiece of cold luxury. Marble floors, high ceilings, and art that belonged in museums. But it was empty. No staff, no family. Just echoes. Kieran led her to a massive kitchen. He went to the fridge, pulled out a bottle of water, and handed it to her. Then he leaned against the granite island, crossing his arms. I am a lichen, he said. Not a werewolf. Werewolves are cursed humans who lose their minds. Lichens are an ancient species. We are born, not bitten, and I am the alpha of the Sterling pack. We control Chicago. Natalie drank the water, if only to give her hands something to do. And the man at the gallery? A rogue, a member of the Blood Moon pack. They are less civilized. They believe humans are food or breeding stock. We have a treaty. He broke it. Why? Natalie asked. Why me? I'm nobody. I sell paintings I can't afford. I date guys who dump me via text. Why are monsters fighting over me? Kieran pushed off the counter. He walked toward her, and this time he didn't stop until he was toe-to-toe with her. He reached out, hesitating, then gently tucked a strand of hair behind her ear. His fingers were hot, burning against her skin. Because... Natalie, he murmured, his voice dropping an octave. You aren't a nobody. You have no idea what runs in your veins. Do you? My blood is O-negative, she said, her voice trembling. That's all I know. It's not about blood type, Kieran said. It's about resonance. For 300 years, the Sterling line has been plagued by a madness. The rage, it consumes us. It turns us into mindless beasts eventually. My father died of it. My grandfather died of it. He took her hand and placed it on his chest. Through the torn shirt, she could feel his heart beating. It was slow, heavy, and powerful. Thump, thump, thump. When I sat at your table last night, Kieran said, the rage stopped. For the first time in 10 years, the noise in my head went silent. You are the anchor, Natalie. You are the cure. Natalie pulled her hand away as if burned. I'm not a cure. I'm a person. You are a moon-touched, Kieran corrected. It's a genetic anomaly. Rare. 1 in a billion. Your pheromones produce a chemical that neutralizes the surplus adrenaline in a lichened system. To the blood moon pack, you are a battery to be drained. To me. He stopped. He looked away, his jaw tightening. To you, Natalie pressed. To me, you are the only thing standing between me and the monster. Kieran turned and walked to a liquor cabinet. He poured himself a glass of amber liquid and downed it in one swallow. Go upstairs. Second door on the left. There are clothes, a shower. Rest. We will figure this out tomorrow. I'm not staying here. The gate is locked, Natalie, and there are guards in the woods. You are staying. It wasn't a request. Natalie stormed upstairs, partly because she was furious, but mostly because she was exhausted. The room he had directed her to was bigger than her entire apartment. The bed was covered in silk. The bathroom had a tub the size of a swimming pool. She showered, scrubbing the smell of the gallery dust, fear, and that coppery scent of blood off her skin. She found a silk robe in the closet. It was too big, clearly meant for a man. But it was soft. She couldn't sleep. She paced the room, moon-touched, lichens, alphas. It sounded like the plot of one of the terrible romance novels she secretly read. But the bruises on her neck from the rogue were very real. Around midnight, she got thirsty. She cracked the door open. The hallway was dark. She crept downstairs. She heard voices coming from the study. She's weak, Kieran. It was a woman's voice. Sharp, imperious. She's human. Lydia. Give her time. That was Kieran. We don't have time. The council is demanding a blood sample. If she isn't a true moon-touched, if she's just a fluke, you know what we have to do. I won't kill her, Lydia. Then the council will you can't protect a stray human forever. If she isn't the mate, she's a liability. Test her. Tonight. Natalie froze on the bottom step. Test her, kill her. She peered around the corner. Kieran was sitting behind a massive desk. Standing in front of him was a woman who looked like a supermodel made of ice. Platinum blonde hair, white suit, lethal heels. I said no, Kieran growled. Then I'll do it. Lydia pulled a silver dagger from her jacket. Kieran was out of his chair in a blur. He slammed his hand onto the desk, cracking the wood. You touch her, Lydia, and I will forget you are my sister. Lydia scoffed. You're soft, brother. That human has made you soft. If you won't test her blood compatibility, then prove she's your mate. Claim her. Mark her. If you don't, the blood moon will come for her, and by law, we can't stop them unless she is pack. Kieran looked down, his fists clenching. She is terrified. I won't force a bond on her. Then she dies, Lydia said cold-heartedly. It's her freedom or her life. Kieran, choose. Natalie gasped. The sound was tiny, barely a breath, but both heads snapped toward the hallway. Lydia's eyes narrowed. Well, the mouse is listening. Kieran stepped around the desk. Natalie. Natalie stepped into the light, clutching the oversized robe. Her fear was gone, replaced by a cold, desperate clarity. She had nowhere to go. Jason was dead. Her apartment was compromised, and apparently there were rules to this game she didn't understand. What does it mean? Natalie asked, her voice steady. To be marked, Lydia laughed. It means he bites you, darling. He mixes his venom with your blood. If you survive, you become part of the pack. You get his strength, his protection. If you don't survive, well, problem solved. Lydia, get out, Kieran snarled. I'm just explaining the options. Lydia threw up her hands and walked to the door. As she passed Natalie, she whispered, "He won't do it. He's too noble, which means by tomorrow night, you'll be Rogue Chow. Good luck." The heavy oak door slammed shut. Natalie and Kieran were alone in the dim study. The air was thick with tension. "Is it true?" Natalie asked. "If you don't, mark me, I'm unprotected." Kieran rubbed his face with his hands. He looked exhausted. The Lycan laws are archaic. If you are not pack, you are neutral territory. The blood moon can take you. If I mark you, you are under the Alpha's protection. Touching you would be an act of war. But it might kill me. The bite is toxic to humans, usually. But if you are moon-touched, your body should accept it. It would bind us. You would feel what I feel. You would be mine. He looked at her with such raw, tortured longing that Natalie's knees went weak. "I don't want to die. Kieran, I won't let you die." "Then do it," she said. Kieran froze. "Natalie, you don't know what you're asking. It's permanent. It changes you." She walked toward him. She remembered the feeling in the restaurant, the safety, the gravity. She remembered how he saved her at the gallery. She stopped in front of him and pulled the collar of the robe aside, exposing the curve of her neck. Her pulse was hammering against the skin. "Jason left me in a restaurant because I wasn't worth a parking fee," she whispered. "You tore a building apart for me. I'll take my chances with the monster." Kieran made a sound deep in his throat, half groan, half growl. His resistance shattered. He pulled her against him, his hands gripping her waist. He buried his face in the crook of her neck, inhaling deeply. "This will hurt," he warned, his voice rough. "I know," she said. He kissed her skin, soft and hot, right over her pulse. Then, his teeth scraped against her neck. Natalie gasped, arching into him, and then he bit down. The return to consciousness didn't happen all at once. It was a slow, violent sensory invasion. The first thing Natalie noticed wasn't pain, which she had expected. It was sound. A cacophony of noise, so loud it felt like a physical assault. She could hear a rhythmic, thundering drumbeat, thump, 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 thump that seemed to be shaking the very foundation of the room. It took her a long, disorienting moment to realize it wasn't a drum at all. It was the heart of a hummingbird hovering over the hydrangeas in the garden. 3 stories down and through a pane of double-paned glass. She winced, pressing her hands over her ears. But the volume didn't decrease. She could hear the house settling, the groan of the timber beams under the weight of the slate roof, the high-pitched whine of electricity coursing through the copper wiring in the walls, and the distant, gurgling rush of water moving through pipes 3 rooms away. "Breathe," a voice said. The word didn't just travel through the air, it vibrated through her bones. Natalie opened her eyes. The world wasn't just high definition, it was hyper-real, saturated with colors she didn't have names for. The morning sunlight streaming through the sheer curtains wasn't a soft glow, it was a blinding, crystalline explosion. She could see the individual dust motes dancing in the shaft of light, could distinguish their jagged edges and the way they tumbled over one another in the air currents. She sat up, gasping. The movement felt too fast, too powerful. The silk sheets, which had felt like cool water against her skin the night before, now felt abrasive, the weave of the fabric distinct and rough against her fingertips. "Focus on my voice, Natalie. Dial it down." Kieran was sitting in a velvet wingback chair in the darkest corner of the room. He looked wrecked. His tuxedo shirt from the night before was unbuttoned, revealing a chest that rose and fell in a slow, deliberate rhythm. His hair was a mess, and dark, bruised circles shadowed his eyes, as if he hadn't blinked in 12 hours. But it wasn't just his appearance that hit her. It was his presence. Natalie gasped, clutching her chest. She could feel him. Not metaphorically, not romantically, but physically. A tether had been snapped into place between them, a thick, humming cable of energy that connected her solar plexus to his. Through it, a deluge of emotions that weren't hers crashed into her mind. She felt a deep, clawing exhaustion. She felt a protective, possessive rage that simmered like low heat. And beneath it all, she felt a profound, overwhelming relief that tasted like fresh water. Natalie stammered, her voice sounding strange in her own ears, deeper, richer, resonating in her chest like a cello string. I can feel you. You were terrified I wouldn't wake up. Kieran stood up. He moved with a cautious, fluid grace, like a man approaching a startled deer. The transition is intense. Your brain is trying to process input from senses you didn't have yesterday. It will fade, or rather, you will learn to filter it. He stopped at the foot of the bed. He didn't touch her, but the air between them crackled with static. "How is your head?" "Clear," Natalie whispered. "Dangerously clear. I feel like I just woke up from a 20-year coma." She reached up to her neck, her fingers trembling. She expected to feel a scab, a bandage, the ragged tear of flesh where he had bitten her. Her skin was smooth, flawless. She traced the spot. There was no wound. Instead, the skin felt slightly raised, cooler than the rest of her body. She scrambled off the bed and ran to the vanity mirror on the other side of the room. The floorboards vibrated under her bare feet, transmitting the location of Kieran's every step behind her. She looked in the mirror and tilted her head. There, right over her pulse point, was a mark. It wasn't a scar. It looked like a tattoo made of starlight, a faint, shimmering silver crescent moon. "You survived," Kieran said softly, watching her reflection. The venom of an alpha usually stops a human heart in minutes. You metabolized it. You integrated it. I'm not human anymore. Am I? Natalie asked, gripping the edge of the vanity table. The marble cracked under her fingers. She stared at the spiderweb fracture she had just created with a casual grip. "Kieran, what am I?" "You are Pack," Kieran said, stepping closer, his heat radiating against her back. "You are my Pack. The bond. It goes both ways. Natalie, I can feel your confusion, your fear, but I can also feel your strength. It's blinding." Before she could ask what he meant, the heavy oak door to the bedroom burst open. The sound was like a gunshot. Natalie spun around, a low growl rising in her throat before she could stop it. Lydia strode into the room, flanked by two massive security guards in dark suits. Kieran's sister looked impeccable in a white power suit, her platinum hair pulled back into a severe bun. She stopped dead when she saw Natalie standing by the vanity. Lydia blinked, her composure cracking for a fraction of a second. She had expected a corpse. She had expected to call the cleaners. "Impossible," Lydia hissed, her eyes darting from Natalie to Kieran. "She's standing." "How is she standing?" "She's awake, Lydia," Kieran said, his voice dropping to a warning growl. He moved to stand between Natalie and his sister. "And she is hungry. I'd suggest you lower your tone." "She's human." Lydia stepped forward, ignoring the warning. "The biology doesn't work, Kieran. Even if she survived the bite, she should be in a coma for weeks, while the gene overwrites her DNA. She shouldn't be standing there looking at me like she wants to rip my throat out. "I am moon-touched," Natalie said. The words bypassed her conscious thought. They just spilled out, carrying a weight of authority that surprised even her. Lydia scoffed, crossing her arms. "Moon-touched is a fairy tale we tell pups to make them behave. It's a genetic myth. If you were truly moon-touched, the mark wouldn't just be silver. It would be—" Lydia stopped. Natalie had stepped out from behind Kieran. A shaft of sunlight hit her face. Lydia gasped, stumbling back a step. The two guards behind her lowered their heads instantly, their instincts overriding their orders. "Look at her eyes." "Lydia," Kieran said softly. Natalie looked back at the mirror. She hadn't noticed it before, too focused on the mark. Her eyes were no longer hazel. The brown and green were gone, burned away. In their place were irises of swirling, molten gold. They were luminous, glowing with an internal light that looked like liquid sun. "The gold," Lydia whispered, the blood draining from her face. She looked terrifyingly pale. That's not just a shifter. That's royal blood. That's Alpha Prime." "It means she isn't just a mate," Kieran said, his voice ringing with pride. "It means she is the apex. The venom didn't change her." "Lydia, it just woke up what was already there." Kieran turned to his sister, his eyes flashing steel grey. "She is your queen. Bow." The room went silent. The tension was thick enough to choke on. Lydia stood frozen, her pride warring with her biological programming. To bow to a human, even a turned one, was an insult, but to defy a gold, that was suicide. Slowly, stiffly. Lydia bent her knees. She lowered her head, exposing her neck in the ultimate sign of submission. "My apologies." Lydia choked out the word, tasting the bitterness of it. "Luna." "Get up," Natalie said. She was surprised by the command in her voice. It wasn't angry. It was absolute. It was the voice of someone who expected to be obeyed. Lydia straightened, smoothing her suit, though her hands were shaking. "You may have the blood, but you don't have the survival skills. The Blood Moon Pack knows you're here. Silas knows." "They do," Kieran nodded grimly. "Silas, their alpha, has called for a summit. Tonight, the Winter Solstice Gala at the Drake Hotel. He claims it is neutral ground. He wants to see the human pet I broke the treaty for." "He wants to kill me," Natalie said flatly. The fear was there, but it was distant now, muted by the golden fire in her blood. "He wants to test you," Kieran corrected. "He wants to see if the rumors are true. If I marked a normal human, I am weak, and he will attack the estate tonight. If I marked a moon-touched, if I marked a gold, then I am invincible." Kieran turned to Natalie, taking her hands in his. His touch was grounding, silencing the sensory chaos in the room. "We have to go. Natalie, we have to walk into that ballroom, surrounded by our enemies, and show them exactly what you are. If we hide, they will hunt us. If we show them the monster, they will fear us." Natalie looked at the man who had saved her life. She looked at Lydia, who was still eyeing her with a mixture of terror and awe. Then she looked at her reflection, the glowing eyes, the silver mark, the woman who was no longer the broke art student who got dumped via text. Jason was dead. Her old life was ashes. This was the only life left. "Okay," Natalie said, a small, dangerous smile touching her lips. "If we're going to a war dressed as a party, then I'm going to need a much better dress." The grand ballroom of the Drake Hotel was a masterpiece of Gilded Age architecture, crystal chandeliers the size of small cars, velvet drapes heavy with history, and floors of polished Italian marble. To a human guest, the Winter Solstice Gala would have appeared as the pinnacle of Chicago high society. The air smelled of expensive perfume, roast duck, and old money. But to Natalie, with her senses now stripped of their human dullness, the room was a suffocating pit of vipers. She didn't just smell the Chanel, no. 5. She smelled the metallic tang of adrenaline spiking in the veins of the women standing near the buffet. She didn't just hear the string quartet playing Vivaldi. She heard the low, guttural growls disguised as throat-clearing from the men in tuxedos. She smelled the rot of ambition and the musk of territorial aggression. It was a room full of predators pretending to be people. Breathe. Kieran's voice was a low vibration against her ear. His hand rested on the small of her back, his touch burning through the thin fabric of her gown. You are projecting your heartbeat. It sounds like a war drum. I'm not scared. Kieran, Natalie whispered, her eyes scanning the sea of black ties and silk. I'm angry. They're looking at us like we're food. They are looking at you like you are food, Kieran corrected gently, his grip tightening protectively. They look at me and see a treaty violation. Natalie straightened her spine. She wore a dress of liquid red silk, backless and daring, cut high on the thigh. It was a statement piece the color of blood, the color of warning. Strapped to her thigh beneath the silk, cold against her skin, was a silver dagger dipped in concentrated wolfsbane. It was a crude weapon for a queen, but Natalie wasn't taking chances. Suddenly, the heavy oak doors at the far end of the ballroom slammed open. The string quartet faltered and died out. The chatter ceased instantly, replaced by a silence so heavy it felt physical. Silas had arrived. The alpha of the Blood Moon pack was a biological nightmare. He stood nearly 7 feet tall, his tuxedo straining against muscles that looked like knotted ropes. A scar ran from his temple to his jaw, pulling his lip into a permanent sneer. He was flanked by 6 of his lieutenants, men who moved with the twitchy, violent energy of hyenas. Silas didn't walk. He prowled. He cut a path through the crowd, guests scattering like leaves before a storm. He stopped 5 feet from Kieran and Natalie, the distance calculated to be an insult too close for diplomacy, just right for a brawl. Silas inhaled deeply, an exaggerated wet sound. He looked at Natalie, his eyes dark pits of malice. Sterling, Silas grunted, his voice sounding like gravel grinding in a mixer. I heard the rumors. I didn't believe you were stupid enough to bring the pet to the slaughterhouse. Kieran stepped forward, placing himself partially in front of Natalie. Careful, Silas. You are speaking to the Luna of the Sterling pack. Watch your tongue, or I will remove it. Silas threw his head back and laughed, a barking, jagged sound that grated on Natalie's nerves. Luna, I see a human in a dress that costs more than her life. I smell fair. I smell milk. You broke the ancient accord for this. You killed my beta for a girl who belongs on a menu, not a throne. I killed your beta because he lacked discipline, Kieran said, his voice dropping to a subsonic rumble that rattled the champagne glasses on nearby trays. Do not make the same mistake. Silas stopped laughing. His face went cold, the predator surfacing. The council is watching. Sterling, the old laws say a human cannot hold rank. Without a true mate bond, she is open season, and I am hungry. Silas moved. It was a blur of motion, intended to terrify. He reached out, his hand heavy and scarred, aiming to stroke Natalie's cheek. It was a violation, a test of dominance. He wanted to see Kieran flinch. He wanted to see Natalie scream. He got neither. before Kieran could shift, before the breath could leave his lungs. Natalie moved. Her new reflexes were a revelation, faster than thought. She reached up and caught Silas's wrist mid-air. The impact was shocking. Silas froze, his eyes widening. He tried to pull back, but Natalie's grip was iron. She channeled every ounce of her frustration, the humiliation of the restaurant, the terror of the gallery, the madness of the last 2 days into her hand. Crunch! The sound of the Alpha's radius bone snapping echoed like a gunshot in the silent room. Silas roared, dropping to one knee, shock overriding the pain. "You do not touch me," Natalie said, her voice steady, icy, and echoing with a power that wasn't entirely her own. "And you do not threaten my mate." For a second, the room was paralyzed. Then, chaos erupted. She attacked an Alpha. One of the lieutenants screamed. "Kill the witch!" The 6 lieutenants lunged. "Natalie, get back!" Kieran roared. The air shimmered as Kieran shifted. It was a violent, explosive transformation. His tuxedo shredded, buttons popping like bullets, as black fur burst through skin. In a heartbeat, a massive black wolf stood where the man had been. He launched himself at the first 3 attackers, a blur of teeth and fury. Tables were overturned. Crystal shattered. Humans screamed and scrambled for the exits as the ballroom turned into a war zone. Natalie was thrown back against a marble pillar by the force of the brawl. She saw a flash of grey fur. One of Silas's lieutenants, a wiry, scarred wolf, had broken away from the pack and was diving for her throat. She didn't panic. Time seemed to slow down. She reached for the slit in her dress. Her fingers closed around the hilt of the silver dagger. As the wolf lunged, jaws snapping inches from her face, Natalie dropped to her knees. She didn't retreat. She slid underneath his leap as she passed under him. She drove the dagger upward. The silver burned. The wolf howled, crashing into the buffet table in a spray of appetizers and blood. He thrashed, the wolfsbane paralyzing his limbs instantly. But the victory was short-lived. Across the room, the tide had turned. Silas had shifted. He was a monstrosity, a grey beast twice the size of a normal timber wolf, a tank of muscle and rage. He had Kieran pinned against the orchestra pit. Kieran was fighting valiantly, snapping and clawing, but he was exhausted from fighting 3 wolves at once. Silas clamped his massive jaws onto Kieran's shoulder, shaking him violently. Kieran's pained yelp tore through Natalie's mind via their psychic bond. She felt his agony as if it were her own, the tearing of muscle, the crushing of bone. He was going to die. "No!" Natalie screamed. It wasn't a plea. It was a rejection of reality. Something inside her snapped. The golden energy she had seen in the mirror surged, flooding her veins like liquid fire. It wasn't adrenaline. It was the ancient biological imperative of the moon touched, the dormant power that controlled the beast. She stepped forward, the red dress flowing around her like blood in the water. She didn't run. She didn't raise her weapon. She looked straight at Silas, her eyes igniting with a blinding, molten gold light. She opened her mouth, and a voice that was not hers, a voice that sounded like the earth grinding together, like the moon pulling the tides, erupted from her throat. "Submit." The command hit the room like a physical shockwave. The windows blew out, glass raining down into the street below. Every wolf in the room froze, their instincts, hardwired for millennia to obey the Alpha Prime, hijacked their motor functions. They slammed their bellies to the floor, whining, unable to resist the absolute authority of the command. Even Silas, the massive grey wolf, stiffened mid-kill. His jaws locked. He tried to fight it, his muscles trembling, saliva dripping from his teeth. but the biological compulsion was too strong. He released Kieran and collapsed onto the marble, whimpering, forced into a posture of absolute submission. Kieran scrambled back, shifting into his human form. He was naked, bleeding heavily from his shoulder, gasping for air. He looked at Silas, then he looked at Natalie. Natalie stood amidst the wreckage, her chest heaving, the golden light slowly fading from her eyes, leaving them a warm, human hazel. The room was silent, save for the whimpering of the defeated pack. Kieran stood up. He limped over to Silas, who was now shifting back into his human form, a broken, trembling man on the floor. Kieran grabbed Silas by the throat and lifted him off the ground. "Do it," Silas gargled, spitting blood. "Finish it." Kieran raised his hand, his claws extending, ready to tear Silas's throat out. The room held its breath. This was the law of the wild. To the victor go the spoils. But Kieran paused. He looked back at Natalie. She was trembling now, the adrenaline fading, leaving her exhausted. But she met his gaze and shook her head. A subtle, almost imperceptible no. Kieran looked back at Silas. The rage in his eyes cooled to a glacial disdain. "Death is too easy for you," Kieran whispered. "You wanted to be a king. I'm going to make you a beggar." Kieran slashed, not at the throat, but lower. With surgical precision, he severed the tendons in Silas's legs. Silas screamed, collapsing into a heap. "I strip you of your rank," Kieran announced, his voice booming through the ruined hall. "I strip you of your territory. You are Omega. You are nothing. If you ever cross the sterling borders again, my queen won't be the one to stop you. I will." Kieran turned his back on the sobbing. Broken enemy. He walked to Natalie, ignoring the stares of the council members who were peeking out from behind overturned tables. He stopped in front of her. He didn't care about the blood, or the nudity, or the ruin. He cupped her face with his hands. "Are you hurt?" he asked, his voice cracking with emotion. "I broke a nail." Natalie let out a shaky laugh, holding up her hand. "And I think I ruined the dress." Kieran laughed, a sound of pure, unadulterated relief. He pulled her into him, kissing her fiercely, a kiss that tasted of iron and victory. "You didn't just ruin the dress, Natalie," he whispered against her lips. "You ruined them." 6 months later. The restaurant L'Oubli was quiet, bathed in the warm glow of candlelight. Natalie sat at table 4. The tablecloth was white, the bread was warm. But this time, she wasn't checking her phone every 30 seconds. She was calmly reading the wine list. "Madam." The waiter approached. He was new, young, and nervous. "Are we waiting for someone?" Natalie looked up, a soft smile playing on her lips. She rested a hand on her stomach, where a tiny, second heartbeat was just beginning to flutter, a secret she hadn't shared yet. "Yes," she said. "My husband, he has a habit of making dramatic entrances, as if on cue." The heavy glass doors opened. Kieran Sterling walked in. The temperature in the room didn't drop this time. Instead, it seemed to warm up. He wasn't the terrifying stranger in the charcoal suit anymore. He was wearing a soft knit sweater and jeans, looking less like a king and more like a man in love. He slid into the seat opposite her, the same seat he had taken that night. "Sorry I'm late," he said, reaching across the table to take her hand. Lydia was arguing with the contractors about the nursery. She insists that Gray is distinguished. I told her the baby isn't a lawyer. "We can do yellow," Natalie laughed. "Yellow is happy." Kieran smiled, squeezing her fingers. He glanced at the empty chair at the table next to them, then back at her. His eyes darkened slightly, the memory of that night passing between them. "You know," Kieran said softly, tracing the wedding band on her finger. I still think about him sometimes. Jason? Natalie raised an eyebrow. Why, he's ancient history. Because, Kieran grinned, his eyes flashing with that familiar, wolfish mischief. If he hadn't been such a blind, arrogant fool, if he hadn't left this seat empty, I never would have sat down. I never would have found my queen. He lifted her hand to his lips and kissed the knuckles. His loss. Natalie picked up her glass of Pinot Noir, the 98 vintage. She clinked it against his water glass. Our gain, she whispered. And that, my friends, is how a disaster date turned into a royal reign. Natalie didn't just find a man who would pay for dinner. She found her power, her voice, and a love that could literally bring an empire to its knees. She went from crying over a text message to commanding an army of wolves with a single word. It just goes to show sometimes, the empty seat at the table isn't a rejection. It's destiny making room for the person who actually belongs there. I really hope you enjoyed this 7-part saga of the Alpha's debt. If you loved this story of karma, romance, and supernatural revenge, please destroy that like button. It helps the channel so much and tells me you want more stories like this. And I have a question for you. If you were Natalie, would you have spared Silas, or would you have finished him off? Let me know in the comments below. Don't forget to subscribe and ring the notification bell so you never miss a video. I have a brand new series starting next week about a billionaire who hires a fake wife to secure his inheritance, only to realize she's a rival corporate spy. You do not want to miss the twists in that one. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you in the next story.